Imagine a country standing on the precipice of survival. It is not just about managing natural resources or balancing budgets. It is about holding the very fabric of society together. In a nation where faith forms the bedrock of daily life, with approximately 60% of the population identifying as Muslim, spiritual centers are more than just buildings. They are the ultimate sanctuaries of community, identity, and stability. So, what happens when the state steps in and shuts down one of the largest places of worship in the capital? It is not merely an administrative footnote. It is a social earthquake for millions of citizens who already endure the daily anxiety of economic uncertainty and severe national security challenges. Taking away a pillar of community life strikes directly at the national nerve. This action is not just about managing a localized crowd. It is about navigating the incredibly fragile thread between maintaining public order and preserving public trust. When a government makes a move this drastic and symbolic, it signals a pain point so deep that waiting is no longer an option. The state perceives a threat to its core stability, and the reaction is immediate, overriding all other social considerations. Let us look at the facts, stripping away the rumors and focusing purely on the concrete administrative steps taken by Ibrahim Traoré's government. The entire institutional landscape shifted within a remarkably narrow window, exactly 14 days. It began with the detainment of Dr. Muhammad Ishaq Kindo, a highly influential religious figure whose voice resonates deeply within the capital city of Ouagadougou. Following his detainment, the immediate ripple effect was predictable yet intense. Supporters gathered, calls for mobilization echoed across social networks, and the political atmosphere grew incredibly dense. Instead of letting the situation breathe or entering prolonged public negotiations, the state executed a rapid, structural response. They did not just disperse the crowds on the streets, they moved systematically to dismantle the organizational capacity behind them. First, a major mosque associated with the events was shut down until further notice, a highly symbolic move in a deeply religious society. Then came the defining administrative strike. On June 9th, the government issued two specific decrees. The targets were not random individuals, but two legally recognized and highly organized entities, a prominent Muslim youth coordination group and the Al-Alam Association. The penalty enacted was a strict 3-month administrative suspension, 14 days. That is all it took to transition from the initial detainment of one individual to the sweeping suspension of established community networks. In the realm of state governance, this speed is a stark departure from the norm. Typically, administrations might take weeks, if not months, to evaluate the risks of public assembly before applying such heavy legal constraints. But under Traoré's administration, the sequence was swift, deliberate, and undeniably firm. The authorities utilized a strictly defined regulatory framework regarding associations to enforce these temporary suspensions, explicitly citing the absolute necessity to maintain public order. They identified what they perceived as a structural risk, mapped out the potential mobilization nodes, especially among the youth, and neutralized them before they could expand their influence beyond the capital. This rapid, unrelenting sequence of events forces us to pause and ask a fundamental question. Why did the government of Ibrahim Traoré act with such unprecedented speed? If we look strictly at the official terminology presented to the public, this is framed as a simple matter of temporary suspensions aimed at preventing public disruption. It is presented as an administrative necessity to ensure the daily functioning of the state. However, analyzing the sequence of these decrees reveals a much larger, more complex narrative. Is this merely a routine security measure, or is it the activation of a highly sensitive political strategy? We are witnessing a government that clearly no longer views public mobilization as a standard civic exercise. Instead, every large gathering, every organized network, is evaluated as a potential catalyst that could compromise national stability. In a nation grappling with severe security challenges on its borders, the tolerance for internal friction has effectively dropped to zero. This 14-day window represents a profound shift in how the state handles internal pressures. It forces us to examine a critical dilemma. Is this rapid-fire approach to institutional control a necessary shield to prevent a national crisis? Or is it a risky centralization of power that might alienate the very citizens it seeks to protect? To understand the true weight of these decrees, we must look past the signatures on the paper and dive deep into the severe security equation that dictates every move in Burkina Faso today. To comprehend the swiftness of those 14 days, one must pull the lens back from the capital city and look at the broader, intricate map of the Sahel region. Burkina Faso does not exist in a vacuum. It operates within one of the most geopolitically complex and demanding environments on the globe. Over the past decade, the regional security landscape has shifted dramatically, presenting unprecedented structural challenges to the state. We are observing a nation where an estimated 2 million people have been internally displaced, forced to abandon their ancestral agricultural lands due to relentless pressure from non-state armed entities. This is not a distant or theoretical vulnerability. It is a daily, pressing reality that fundamentally rewrites the national budget. The government is compelled to allocate a massive percentage of its financial and logistical resources to defense and comprehensive security campaigns, leaving an incredibly narrow margin for error in all other sectors, including domestic civil administration. Entire provinces require intense, synchronized management just to maintain basic supply lines, ensure food security, and deliver essential public services. When a state is already stretching its administrative and logistical capacities to their absolute limits to secure its national borders, the internal political dynamics change entirely. The threshold for tolerance regarding domestic friction drops significantly. In a highly stable country operating under peaceful conditions, a localized protest or a mass gathering might be viewed as a standard expression of civil society. However, in a nation actively mobilizing every asset to reclaim its territorial integrity and achieve economic autonomy, any unmanaged mass mobilization is immediately calculated as a potential secondary crisis. The state simply cannot afford the logistical strain of deploying specialized security forces to manage large urban demonstrations while simultaneously coordinating complex operations in rural territories. This harsh geographical and economic reality is the invisible architect behind those rapid suspension decrees. The government is prioritizing the preservation of the state apparatus above all else, operating on the premise that without national stability, all other civic functions become impossible to guarantee. This operational reality brings us directly to the core philosophy of Ibrahim Traoré's administration, a strategic framework we can define as the doctrine of preventive security. For many years, the traditional governance approach in various parts of West Africa relied heavily on a reactive model. Authorities would monitor a developing situation, allowing community networks to mobilize and discourses to circulate, intervening only when public order was actively and physically disrupted. Traoré's administration has fundamentally rewritten that institutional playbook. Under this new doctrine, the state no longer waits for a physical manifestation of instability to justify its intervention. Instead, it acts decisively on the earliest structural indicators of risk. The leadership views the domestic landscape through a highly calculated lens of risk management. If a highly influential public figure is detained, the administration immediately anticipates the corresponding mobilization of their support base. They do not wait to observe whether that mobilization will remain within the bounds of peaceful discourse or escalate into a broader confrontation. Instead, they intercept the organizational capacity to mobilize altogether. This represents a profound ideological shift from reactive judicial management to proactive administrative prevention. Proponents of this doctrine argue that in a state of national emergency, waiting for concrete proof of an impending crisis is a luxury the country simply cannot afford. They assert that acting early, even if it requires utilizing strict administrative tools like temporary suspensions, ultimately preserves national infrastructure and social cohesion by preventing the escalation of unrest. It is a strategy of calculated interception. The government is projecting a clear message. The survival and stability of the state supersede traditional political patience. Every policy shift, every administrative decree, and every public statement is meticulously synchronized to project an image of absolute institutional control. the administration profoundly understands the psychological aspect of governance during a security campaign. Any perceived hesitation or bureaucratic delay in the capital could be misinterpreted as weakness, potentially encouraging further destabilization from various. These swift administrative actions are not merely about pausing the activities of a specific religious or youth organization. They function as a powerful broadcast to the entire nation and to observing international partners that the central authority remains unquestionable, highly vigilant, and prepared to utilize all legal frameworks available to maintain internal equilibrium. Understanding this proactive doctrine helps decipher the specific mathematics embedded in the June 9th decrees, particularly the calculated decision to impose exactly a 3-month suspension on the organizations involved. Why choose a duration of 3 months? In the realm of public administration and the management of social movements, 3 months is an exceptionally strategic unit of time. It is deliberately temporary, which serves to avoid the severe domestic polarization and potential international pushback that a permanent dissolution of these organizations would almost certainly trigger. Yet, a period of 90 days is long enough to act as a decisive institutional circuit breaker. A 90-day pause effectively dismantles the immediate momentum of any grassroots movement. In an era where social media algorithms accelerate the spread of information and emotional responses, breaking that digital and physical momentum is crucial for the state. The suspension disrupts established communication channels, pauses logistical coordination, and scatters the concentration of youth networks that were beginning to coalesce. By the time a 3-month suspension expires, the initial emotional catalyst in this specific case, the detainment of the imam and the sudden closure of the mosque, has lost its most volatile urgency. The daily focus of the populace naturally shifts to other pressing economic and social matters. The state utilizes this specific time frame to systematically decouple the various nodes of potential resistance before they can unite. It prevents a localized religious or community grievance from merging with broader economic frustrations or youth unemployment issues. The 3-month window grants the government the necessary space to de-escalate the immediate tension, continuously monitor the fragmented networks, and re-establish the dominant state narrative without the exhausting requirement of engaging in prolonged, street-level management. It is a highly deliberate formula designed to starve a potential crisis of its oxygen before it has the opportunity to ignite into a nationwide issue. Through these actions, the government is essentially purchasing crucial time, utilizing administrative law as a strategic buffer to secure the internal perimeter of the capital, ensuring that the primary focus of the state remains firmly fixed on the broader, existential campaign for national autonomy and comprehensive security. To fully grasp the magnitude of these administrative decisions, we must look beyond the immediate borders of Burkina Faso. The decrees issued in the capital did not merely echo within the domestic political arena. They sent a profound reverberation across the entire West African geopolitical landscape. Across the region, policymakers, security analysts, and diplomatic observers are watching Ibrahim Traoré's administration with intense scrutiny. Why? Because West Africa operates as an intricately connected ecosystem, the borders separating these nations are often porous, and the severe challenges of ideological mobilization, economic migration, and security management are shared collectively. When one state decides to fundamentally alter its approach to internal governance and public order, it creates a formidable precedent that neighboring countries cannot ignore. Traoré is not simply managing a localized internal crisis. He is actively testing a completely new model of statecraft in a region that has historically struggled with institutional fragility. To understand the true weight and the strategic rationale of this new model, one must draw a careful comparative analysis with historical precedents in the region, most notably the complex security trajectory of neighboring giants like Nigeria. For years, political scientists and regional security experts have closely studied the evolution of ideological and religious mobilization within Nigeria's vast and highly diverse demographic landscape. In past decades, various grassroots networks, often driven by highly charismatic figures and distinct ideological visions, were permitted to operate with a significant degree of freedom. They organized massive gatherings, disseminated their specific narratives, built extensive financial networks, and established deep roots across multiple communities over several years. The traditional political approach in those scenarios was heavily rooted in patience, observation, and a reliance on conventional civic frameworks. The state typically hesitated to intervene directly, adhering to administrative norms that prioritized the freedom of assembly until there was undeniable, material proof of a physical threat to public safety. However, this prolonged institutional tolerance often yielded catastrophic results. By the time the central authorities finally recognized these mobilization networks as severe, structural threats to national stability and decided to deploy the heavy state apparatus to dismantle them, it was profoundly too late. The networks had already evolved into deeply entrenched, highly organized security challenges. This delayed reaction forced the state into massive, decades-long security campaigns that drained essential national resources, severely disrupted local economies, and fractured the overall social cohesion of the country. The administration in Burkina Faso has meticulously studied these regional case studies. The swift 14-day sequence of administrative suspensions utilized by Traoré's government is not an isolated, emotional reflex. It is a direct, calculated rejection of that historical model of governance. The authorities in Ouagadougou are effectively operating on the premise that allowing any mobilization network to mature, gather momentum, and consolidate its influence over several years is a catastrophic strategic error. They look at the prolonged, exhausting struggles of their regional neighbors and conclude that traditional political patience, while theoretically ideal, in a perfectly peaceful context, constitutes a critical vulnerability within the current, highly volatile Sahelian security environment. Therefore, the stark contrast emerges not just in the administrative actions taken, but in the compressed timeline of those actions. Where other nations historically waited years to act against growing structural risks, Traoré's government chooses to act in a matter of days. They have deliberately replaced the regional tradition of patient observation with a doctrine of aggressive institutional control. The government operates on the unwavering conviction that a state must identify and neutralize the organizational infrastructure of any potential movement long before that movement ever contemplates transitioning into a concrete security challenge. This comparative approach elevates the localized events in Burkina Faso into a much broader geopolitical signal. Ibrahim Traoré is actively redefining the concept of state sovereignty and internal authority within West Africa. Through these swift administrative mechanisms, he is broadcasting a powerful, unambiguous message to both domestic audiences and regional partners. The message asserts that the new Burkina Faso will not be paralyzed by bureaucratic hesitation, conventional political protocols, or the fear of external diplomatic friction when the internal stability of the nation is at stake. By prioritizing immediate institutional control over extended political dialogue, the administration is establishing a new, highly assertive standard for crisis management. This paradigm shift suggests a core belief that the preservation of the state machinery and the absolute maintenance of public order are the fundamental prerequisites for any future economic autonomy or comprehensive structural reform. Traoré is projecting an image of a state that refuses to be a victim of circumstance, choosing instead to rigorously manage its internal environment to prevent external exploitation. However, this firm assertion of state power across the regional chessboard brings its own intricate set of complications. While neighboring governments might privately analyze the decisive nature of these preventive security measures, recognizing the undeniable logistical efficiency of dismantling a risk in its absolute infancy, they also recognize the profound, inherent risks involved. Establishing a governance model that relies so heavily on rapid administrative suspensions and immediate state interventions sets an incredibly demanding standard for the leadership itself. It requires a flawless, continuously justified execution of power, where every preemptive action must be perfectly calculated to avoid alienating the broader populace. As Traoré positions his nation as a proactive, fiercely independent force in regional security management, prioritizing swift interception over historical patience, he simultaneously places his administration on an incredibly precarious path. Regional observers are no longer just watching to see if this preventive doctrine can temporarily halt a specific internal mobilization. They are watching closely to see if this heavily centralized, rapid response model of state authority can actually foster genuine, long-term national resilience. This rapid consolidation of institutional control, while effective in the immediate term, places the administration of Ibrahim Traoré on an incredibly precarious tightrope. Governing through preventive administrative decrees, rather than relying on transparent, prolonged judicial processes, introduces a delicate and profound systemic risk. When a state suspends prominent organizations and shuts down significant places of worship based primarily on the anticipation of risk rather than the concrete, established evidence of a crime, it walks a very fine, often blurred line between necessary national security and institutional overreach. The primary, most pressing danger in this approach is the potential alienation of the very citizens the state desperately relies upon for its broader survival. In a deeply interconnected society where faith, community networks, and youth organizations are foundational to daily life, sweeping preemptive measures can easily be misinterpreted by the general public. Everyday citizens who have absolutely no intention of disrupting public order might view these rapid administrative suspensions not as a protective state shield, but as a systematic, unwarranted restriction of their civic life. This perception, if allowed to fester in the absence of clear state communication, directly threatens the fundamental concept of social cohesion. A nation actively fighting for its sovereignty and economic autonomy absolutely requires a unified, supportive populace. If a significant, mobilized portion of the population begins to feel marginalized, misunderstood, or unfairly targeted by the state's aggressive security apparatus, the resulting internal friction could ultimately become just as deeply destabilizing as the external, geographical threats the government is so heavily trying to combat. The balance is extraordinarily fragile, pushed too hard, and the state risks creating the exact internal division it is trying to prevent. The true, enduring cost of this preventive security doctrine is therefore measured not in the sheer number of administrative decrees issued, but in the heavy, complex burden of responsibility it distributes across the entire structure of society. This critical responsibility operates simultaneously on three distinct, highly interdependent levels. First and foremost, the state itself bears the ultimate burden of proof. By actively choosing the path of rapid administrative intervention over traditional political patience, the government must continuously, actively demonstrate to its people that these strict measures actually yield genuine, measurable stability, and not merely a temporary, enforced silence. The administration must rigorously prove that its actions are purely protective and temporary, keeping the crucial avenues of legal recourse and institutional dialogue wide open, ensuring that administrative firmness does not inadvertently transform into a permanent closure of civil space. If the state fails to prove this, public trust will inevitably erode. Second, the community leadership and the various religious organizations hold an equally critical responsibility in maintaining this delicate national balance. They must navigate this highly sensitive, pressurized environment by strictly adhering to established legal frameworks. Their essential role is to prioritize structured, respectful dialogue with state authorities over the unpredictable dynamics of street-level mobilization. They carry the profound duty of actively guiding the youth away from volatile, confrontational rhetoric, ensuring that legitimate community grievances are channeled through proper institutional pathways. Their ultimate success is defined by their ability to advocate for their communities effectively and peacefully, definitively proving to the state apparatus that robust civic engagement does not equate to public disruption. They must act as the crucial mediators between the raw emotion of the public and the rigid security requirements of the government. Finally, there is the vital, often overlooked responsibility of the ordinary citizen. In an era where digital information moves exponentially faster than official state decrees, every single individual must consciously become a critical, objective filter. The rapid, unchecked spread of unverified rumors, manipulated audio recordings, or emotionally charged narratives on social networks possesses the terrifying capacity to escalate a localized administrative dispute into a severe, unmanageable national crisis within a matter of hours. Citizens must practice immense intellectual restraint. They must actively choose critical thinking and factual verification over the impulsive, emotionally driven sharing of digital content. In a highly sensitive security environment, public indifference or informational negligence can be incredibly dangerous. When citizens fail to verify the facts, they inadvertently allow the most radical, unverified voices to dictate the national mood, severely complicating the state's effort to maintain order. Ultimately, the sweeping narrative of these 14 days in Burkina Faso extends far beyond the temporary, 3-month suspension of 2 specific organizations or the sudden closure of a single mosque in the capital. It provides a profound, unobstructed insight into the core governing philosophy of Ibrahim Traoré. He is systematically attempting to architect a completely new type of sovereign state, one that prioritizes absolute internal discipline, rigorous institutional control, and preemptive security as the non-negotiable foundations for ultimate economic and political autonomy. He has deliberately chosen a difficult, solitary path where the state absolutely refuses to remain vulnerable to prolonged internal debates when the very survival of the nation is actively at stake. Yet, the broad arc of political history consistently demonstrates that true, enduring national stability cannot be achieved through administrative control and security measures alone. It inherently requires the deep, unshakable, voluntary trust of the populace as Burkina Faso continues to navigate its incredibly complex institutional transition. The ultimate historical success of this administration will depend entirely on its ability to perfectly balance the rigid, unforgiving demands of national security with the careful, deliberate preservation of essential social harmony. The rapid decisions made today are actively, permanently shaping the institutional architecture of tomorrow's state. This complex situation leaves us with a profound, highly relevant dilemma, one that resonates far beyond the specific borders of West Africa and speaks to the core of modern governance. When a nation is actively fighting an existential, multi-front battle for its own survival, operating in a highly volatile environment where a single, unmanaged spark can easily ignite a massive structural crisis, how should a society define the absolute boundaries of state power? Where exactly is the definitive line drawn between the justifiable, necessary preventive security required to protect a nation from collapse and the inherent risk of institutional overreach that might ultimately damage the very society it so fiercely intends to save?